As Kimia mentioned, we are going to take a look today at the age-old build versus buy debate and really tackle that and explain why the binary logic there is a bit flawed, and how organizations can take a different pass at this, take a view of really digging in deeper and determining how to address your needs instead of looking at it from just a build versus buy perspective. I am joined by two experts, one of which is our legal strategy, technology, and governance expert, and other is an expert in technology architecture, data, and execution. So Christina and Ken, can you briefly introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I think that's kind of like the perfect, just like what we do is the perfect introduction, because I love, we've been talking about as we prepared for this, just the amount of like overlap and cross-functional expertise that we have here at Hike 2, and I think no exception here. Like Brett, my background is in about 8-10 years of litigation practice, and both in the public sector and private, on the federal level at the Department of Justice. When I went back to private practice, spent most of my time building out solutions, really pre kind of AI, like just automation and core kind of matter management systems, operational systems, and really found like, okay, there has to be a better way. How can we make our lives easier so that we can free ourselves up for the higher value work? And that's how I ended up at Hike 2 here. And really, again, not just in our legal group, but certainly with our legal clients, working to advise on from every single step of the way, from like a truly advisory level through tool selection, implementation, change management, kind of the whole way. So really excited when I get to work with our really more in the weeds technical people. I'm kind of like a self-taught evangelist and I love it, but it's really great to be able to work with our technical architects and data architects and everybody that is a lot smarter and better at it than me, and really come together and bring solutions to life for our clients.
Yeah, great. Yeah, my name's Ken Kwan. I'm the enterprise architect here with Hike 2, and I've been in the industry for a number of years as a data leader and practitioner in a number of industries, banking and finance, healthcare, technology, advertising, retail, you name it, and really helping folks, operationalize data from source systems, third-party systems, bringing all that together into, various data warehousing technologies through analytics, and then connecting with business use cases, also direct, product uses as well, translating that to the end customer. So, a lot of in practice, bringing together sort of analytics and enabling business. Now it's also translated to AI uses, and a lot of the same things. Everyone. I think in almost every panel, there's some discussion around data governance. It's how do we, take this natural resource of data that's pervasive, inputs, outputs everywhere, in order to make sense of it. It's just exciting to now. I make a joke now. It's when we say, insert everywhere, instead of data governance, I just do a search and replace data with AI. So now it's AI governance, because, really all of that, feeds into it. And we'll talk about, how we think about, the build versus buy, when considering, the data architecture, also, organizational architecture.
Fantastic. So organizations are trying to scale. Enterprise AI at the top of the list, of course, or else why would you be here today? So how can we think about this differently, Christina, and how do we really take a look at what is needed in organizations to limit that expensive need and looking at actual true business need, and how do we address that within AI, with AI, but without increasing cost and complexity and fragmentation?
Yeah, I think I'll start with kind of like the what of the like how we even get to a point of understanding what the business need is when we are talking about the build versus buy kind of question. I think like with any technology adoption over the last like many years, and certainly in most complex industries, anytime there's a new and exciting technology, you get, and I know you said a little bit about kind of moving from like SaaS into more of like the AI, and seeing that happen over time, that evolution. It's kind of the same thing every time, where people get really excited and they want their hands on something right away. They want to see how they can use it, or right, you have vendors coming to you and saying, hey, try this, and that's great. We love that. But you end up with all these kind of just pieces of technology, and you don't really know that, is this what's designed to solve my need, my challenge, because you haven't actually started with what is the challenge, the problem that I'm trying to solve. So really what we see again is that kind of, this. We've got data everywhere. We've got different people that do different things in our organization, right? We can think about higher level, like distilling an AI use case to document review or something like that. But in reality, you have a lot of different types of users and parts, departments, teams, practices, what have you in your company that have different uses for it. So you end up with all of these kind of things rather than what is a challenge that we face as an organization that we can use AI to solve that is kind of malleable, that is scalable, that we can really repurpose and restructure for a lot of different uses versus we have 800 tools that nobody has used in 14 years. So that's kind of where we start, I think. Do you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, and I think some of the earlier panelists mentioned it is having an AI strategy, because I see, at clients there's two ends. There's one where, there's this concept now of AI brain fry. You have 8 different AI tools. Every SaaS vendor has some AI implementation, some chatbot that you're using. What do you use for what situations? You have on the other end where it's very slow adoption. I think with both of those, it's still understanding, what is the job to be done, and what is the value that's not being brought to the organization, but also the individuals, so that they can connect their work to it, and make them more effective. So, in a lot of this is really just enhancing kind of focus. So in the area where you have, sprawl, SaaS sprawl, is really giving, what is your AI, what's the job to be done, and how do you kind of enhance and engage that? We talked about what is like change management. Mm-hmm. So it's all, sort of part and parcel of that. You may be coming from it from different angles. But I think, with organizations, it's increasingly necessary to have that strategy, that focus, that North Star and guiding light when it comes to AI. Similar to the way, folks use, different sort of SaaS tools. Maybe at some point people were, I'm sure there's probably a dozen or more project management tools. At some point, people sort of narrowed it down to, okay, we're just using this. This works for our use case. But also, it's organizationally specific. There's just not just one tool. Different companies use different frameworks.
I think that's right, and I'd just add one other thing, which is that you made me think of, which is when you talked about that move from like data to AI, understanding that a lot of organizations have already gone through these kind of like these changes. They've already done that. We've had the tool fatigue. We've had the training issues. Now we finally have a really great system for our core, operational platform, or our core data management system, our documents, what have you. And it's really this kind of like, instead of going out and buying a million new things and being like, all right, now we got to move our data to this. Now we've got to rebuild all of our workflows in this. Thinking about it more as an enterprise, like you said, as more of like an architectural ecosystem, and how can we did all the work, we've got great data, now how can we leverage it, rather than, all right, we're moving into a whole new thing and starting all over again. Right.
I think that's perfect, and making sure that you have that scalability and that vision, and how does your AI vision really support your organizational vision is so incredibly important. I'd love to dig in a little bit on the build versus buy, what we've called the binary trap. I think it's a great phrase, because one size doesn't fit all, and I know that anyone that's been in the technology world for any period of time has faced this question time and time again. not just with AI, of course, but with software solutions, with hardware, and looking at this, and even with staffing. Do you hire your own or do you outsource, right? A lot of times that is not so much a binary type of question, but that is more of a hybrid question. And I think we're seeing that with AI as well. So it'd be great to hear your perspectives on this question, the way that you think about evaluating build versus buy, and how not to end up with so many custom solutions or so many different platforms that they don't integrate, and how to really support your enterprise.
Yeah. So, build versus buy, the axiom that I go back to is, you buy the commodity, but you build your competitive advantage. And so, thinking through the stack, because, AI is everywhere, can insert itself in anywhere in the organization. So, one of the examples that I've used kind of humorously is, I don't know if you've heard CNBC, some journalists actually took the effort to use Claude Code, and they basically vibe coded Monday.com, within a few days. So now they have this capability, but what does it mean? Does it mean, okay, how is it being supported? How do you scale it? How do you ensure the security? It's great that now, everyone is a coder, but, not everyone is a infrastructure maintenance, a cloud architect, security and compliance and things of that nature. So there's this, there's this way that we can get very quickly to kind of demo, but how does that actually scale to the organization? From the buy perspective, it's also where the industry is moving so quickly. I've heard it said that, when you are implementing, you sort of don't think about how you implement now. You implement what's coming 6 months from now, because the intelligence will get better, the processes will get better. I was looking, I think within the last 2 weeks, Claude had, they've released maybe, half a dozen, different capabilities. So it's hard to kind of keep up, but, in the buying phase, there's multiple ways to approach it. And sometimes the trap there can be, are you adapting your business to the tools, or are you adapting the tools to your business? Because once you start to buy that, then, obviously you get your vendor lock-in, but sometimes there's actually like a process and workflow lock-in. There's a roadmap lock-in, are they, I think IBM had a lead in AI probably for, maybe 15 plus years. So if you had, bought into kind of the IBM Watson, then, you're kind of stuck with that. So there's also a thought around sort of portability. Somebody mentioned, okay, how embedded is it in your business, and what happens when something else comes along? Can you easily swap that, or does it become, more painful? So those are some of the considerations, that we think. And also the evaluation is not only just, sort of lines of business, but also sort of orthogonally, like in the process. Somebody had mentioned like document management. So there's, you have Microsoft and Google have their own AI packages, but they don't talk to each other. Mm-hmm. But then you have, Claude and ChatGPT who have tools and MCPs that can talk to both. So, what is the decision in terms of, how do you, at what level do you buy? At what level do you kind of integrate? And it becomes, very complex, but I think this is where, going back to kind of first principles and having AI strategy, how does the organization think about how do they win with AI and how it's being implemented?
I think that's a really good point. And I know you talked a little bit about kind of the buy everything in terms of we just keep, adding more to this thing, or that kind of, as Amy mentioned, to start us off, that bit of, now we have to maintain this. We've developed, kind of vibe coded this, and right. Now we have no idea how to keep it up. One point you made me think of with the document management piece is, this single vendor kind of fallacy of I'm sure you all hear it. I know certainly at, large law firms, we hear a lot of we're a Microsoft shop, or we're a Google, what have you. And to your point, I mean, you think about people get kind of caught in this, well, we're going to use Copilot because we use Microsoft Suite, or we're going to use, XYZ. And really, and a lot of the time it's okay, maybe it's not natively part of that suite, but maybe there's a better tool for the actual AI engine that you need, or for the type of, analysis that you're looking for, that we could easily, connect with an API or an MCP server or something like that, and be able to, again, that's sort of the point, not building your AI around like letting the tool drive your business, having that strong kind of like, here's our data, here's our documents, this is really the use case, this is what we need to use that reasoning engine for, and then deciding not just, well, we have to go with this product because this is the other products we have, but knowing that we can really take that data and get it to where it needs to be for that next part. So really orchestrating more of, or building, right? I think that's the point of this binary trap, is like, it's actually not that we're just saying don't go buy everything or don't go build everything. It's that it's not one or the other. It's this first build the pieces, make sure you have, first buy or build the pieces, make sure you have what you need, and then building those additional uses and integrations to, intelligently doing so in a way that's driven by your business strategy rather than the other way around.
I think it's incredibly important. And as we look at, back to your original point, Christina, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And it really is valuable to understand where you're headed, and do you have the tools already at your disposal to get you there? And if you don't, what are the tools that you have? What are the capabilities? And to your point, and to Ken's point, how do you make sure that you're integrating those successfully so that you don't end up with pockets either within your infrastructure or pockets in your organization, because you want to be able to leverage your own internal intelligence as well, which is so incredibly important. I'd love to move on a bit to talk a little bit more about the 4 layers that we see here, and architectural components around AI. And I think it also flows into, Ken, what you were talking a little bit about data governance too. But Christina, maybe you can introduce this topic for us, and really how do you think through this as you're looking at what is the right strategy and design around AI for organizations and for scale?
Sure, yeah. I really love this framework, and I've seen, and like certainly at Hike too, with our clients, we're starting to see a lot more of, when we talk about leading an AI project or an technical architecture project from an advisory lens, where we always kind of start is trying to like translate, if you will, and I don't mean that pedantically, I mean literally being able to take these pieces and apply them to the specific industry, the specific client, the specific need. And I think that this is a really great way to look at it, because again, and I know Ken will talk a lot more about it on kind of as we continue, but really thinking through like, what are the pieces of any AI solution? So not just like, I want to buy one tool that does everything. Thinking through, how can our organization use AI, and how will we use it? How does it interact, integrate, et cetera, with the systems we already have? It's actually starting from this layer of like, if these are the components, I'm not looking at building or buying any of the 4 of these every single time that I do something. It's starting off with that strategy of like, what does our actual infrastructure look like? What does our baseline enterprise sort of stack look like? And then, do we have a really strong system for each of these things as a baseline? Like, is our data clean and governed? Can it move through the system from, through the enterprise from one system to another? Have we selected an AI engine, models, et cetera, which again, we'll leave more to the Ken side, but and then on the user interface piece, and this is the biggest one that I want to kind of touch on, which is that we do see, again, not just tool fatigue, not just adoption fatigue, but a lot of this, like, I don't want to move from between 8 sections to get to the answer that I need, because at that point, like, has AI made my life any easier? Or have I actually, I'm doing more things? So really thinking through, like, do we have, one system that we are moving data to, or presenting, right, the output of what we're doing to our users in a way that they can use it in the way that they naturally work every day, rather than saying like, and here's another thing that you have to use just to get, this. So seeing these 4 pieces and how they come together, and I just love, I would talk to anyone after, we're happy to, chat with you about, but I see as being kind of like, and I'd love to hear more from your technical perspective, but I really do see these as being like distilled to the highest level. Any AI use case is going to depend on like, do we have all four of these things? And again, instead of starting from scratch and going out and buying a new tool, saying, does this enterprise architecture we already have get us there? Can we build a workflow that will go out and get the, what we need to do this and give us the output we need? Or do I need something new here before? And the real point I want to drive in here is this is before even that build versus buy decision. This is like, I've made the original foundational build versus buy. I have these pieces. Now, do I have what I need here, or do we need to look into either building or buying a new piece of this stack?
Right. Yeah, great. And I'll focus, I'll say, more on kind of the left side, because when I think of the brain and I think of AI, I think of it akin to, we have an infinite line of sort of PhD grade intelligence. And AI is naturally stateless. It has no idea who you are, what your problem is, anything. And you have to provide all of that data, all of that context in order for it to even understand. It's trained on all of the data that's out kind of in the internet. But one of the things that it doesn't have your data. It doesn't have, hopefully it doesn't have your data. we can argue that. Your data, your workflows, what you care about, what your values, what your organizations, really, deliver at the end of the day. And when I say, I joke, it's like data governance is AI governance, but now it's much more important, because when you scale this, the AI needs to have that context. And if that context is bad, you'll like garbage in, garbage out. Like we've said this, for years. One of the projects that I undertook was, doing a basic, RAG architecture on a knowledge base. What we quickly found out is that it consistently gave wrong information. When we started to troubleshoot it, we found that all the source documentation was old. It was wrong. It was contradictory. And so in that process, it's like, well, how did it get governed in the first place? How did those, how did this come to be? And it's a lack of discipline around that governance. And so even a lot of the projects that we're working on now are really much more foundational. While everyone is striving to get to that AI point, there is really a sense of, okay, how do we make sense of this data? Like what is a client, or what is a customer? What is an activity? What is the actions? All of those kinds of things. We went to a Snowflake event, and they're implementing their Cortex agent. And so they said, a part of their process is, they take a half-day session, but 80% of that session is just sitting down and interviewing the client to understand what is the data, what are they trying to do, what are the definitions. And when I went up to ask them again, it's like, well, what happens after that? So you have to think of, what happens, 2, 3, 8 changes later, how does that data get kind of fed back into it? And that's still process. That's still organizational knowledge that needs to happen. And so, I think that's where, when you think of, build or buy and kind of your strategy is like, that's the part where you own. And then the commoditization, of the intelligence, that can be bought and that can be swapped out, because, it's constantly moving. But also, because, comparative advantage, these companies are doing it, they have way more engineers, kind of working on it and kind of bringing that to bear. So, getting, the data and the orchestration, the pipelines, the governance, the organizational, intelligence, the details behind it come even before we get to sort of the brain and delivery. And so I think having that, that and also a process to feed back in the system. And so when you think of AI, it becomes a part of that organizational system. It becomes a part of the feedback. I joke a little bit. It's like sometimes I feel like I need to have one-on-ones with AI just so that, like, how are you doing? And, how can we adjust?
Little therapy session.
Exactly. Like, how can we do these things? But again, a lot of it does have to do with the input. So in some sense, it's like, someone's like, oh, well, it's data engineering and analytics is going away. It's like, no, there's actually much more importance now because the system of record, an organization's information now is a critical part of what makes the AI intelligent.
Yeah, I'll add really quickly before we move on. I like to continue an example or analogy through because it helps me really ground it in something that makes sense. So I promise I'm not being paid by a document management vendor, but back to that document management system analogy, example we were giving before. If you think about, I really liked when you said kind of how it gets fed back into the system, because I will say we think about all this technology and how it's making our lives easier and taking away these manual steps. But in reality, if we think about most organizations, I'd love to hear what you think from practical application with clients, but I think most organizations, no matter how good their document management system is, their anything management system, but let's keep with document management, at the end of the day, the process that governs it is largely manual. It is human beings that have finished doing the task that they were doing. They've got their great PowerPoint, their whatever, and they have to save it somewhere. In a lot of organizations, I'm not saying that's but I think most organizations, at least until the last few years, certainly. And so I think that's another kind of, not to add a layer to it, but again, when we think through, that's why I think it's so important to think through what are these 4 layers? What is the technology in our company, in our organization that is executing them? And is it still manual? What is the governance process for it? Because if it's still humans, again, to the point, garbage in, garbage out, you might have a great document management system and you might have great, security and et cetera, right, within that system. But again, if you're depending on humans to put those documents in there, you've added another layer of complexity and is this everything? Do we have all of the documents? Are they versioned correctly, et cetera, all of that.
As a former owner of hundreds, if not 1,000 SOPs stored on SharePoint, I just had some really bad flashbacks.
We have PTSD.
I was
going to go to therapy with AI.
To my AI. So I think it'd be great if we could dig in a bit. We have about 15 minutes left. So if we could dig in a little bit on how do we help organizations even start to think through where to start for build versus buy, and is there? I don't think there's a silver bullet here, but what are the types of questions that either we can help with or that organizations can think through to really try to kickstart this?
Yeah, the ways I think of it is partly organizationally and kind of laying over this is. We talked about strategic advantage. Is this something that kind of drives your business that you need to have control over? This is what makes your organization special and different from anyone else. 2 is also kind of the workflow. Your business operates differently than other businesses, and are there some specifics about that that you again need to have control? From a risk perspective. Are there high-risk items, can't lose areas that need to be maintained within your company, whether it's compliance, legal, depending on where you are kind of in the world, and I'm trying to think of the other part. So those are some of the key decisions, and also thinking of them in each of these different layers. Where you already have some of those capabilities and where you can build upon them, because you don't necessarily want to kind of rip out and just kind of put something different in place. But also, thinking about the portability that we talked about before, is the industry is constantly changing, and so if you were to put AI in one area and take it out in the other area. How would that affect your business? How embedded is it? How embedded is it in your processes? Is it supportive of your process? Is it dictating your process? And obviously, there's the economic approach that we've heard before. Is how are people using it? One of the things that I think of is now there's a great importance on specification and verification. What is it that you wanted to do? How do you know that it did what it needed to do? And then there's the cost component. Was it, economical to do? It's, very easy for me to maybe make a PowerPoint deck, but, spend, $100 on tokens. Is that economical? So you need to also have monitoring and kind of controls on that. Because I think also the economics of this will change. That sometimes they'll be moving away from perhaps seat license to usage, and then also there's some fungibility in terms of where does the AI budget come from now? Does it come from the SaaS budget? Oftentimes there are conversations. Does it come from more of like a human resourcing? Do they start to overlap? So really understanding, what is the cost, that you're, from a buy perspective. Obviously, from the build perspective, there's the similar evaluations too. Just like hosting, any sort of technology yourself. So those are some of the immediate things I think of.
Yeah, it's really interesting because another thing, again, you just keep making me think of things I hadn't even thought of when we were sort of talking through what we wanted to include here. And I think one thing that I hadn't really thought of is that, even when we talk about, when we think about pervasive AI, like using it all the time, I think outside of business, right, the way that people are starting to use like ChatGPT, free tools, right? And we think about the ones that don't require. And those are the ones where, again, putting my lawyer hat on, where we're not feeding any like client data, we're not feeding any, customer data, what have you. It's all open source, and it's kind of more of the just like basic questions where, like you said earlier, and I laughed because I was like, God, that's so terrifying, right? Is that like the source is the open internet? It's like, right? And we all know that half of the internet is like kind of AI slop now. Anyways, those like simple uses that are more kind of just directional advisory, if you will, like, okay, I just need to know more about something I don't know, or an answer to, right? Those things are still out there, and they're still free. And your organization is not preventing you from use. You see what I mean? Like your organization might say we're not using ChatGPT, but if you're using it for a personal, right, or just those kind of high level questions, like that's fine. And so like, why would you waste your right, those tokens that cost? Why would you waste it on that? Whereas where you need that kind of more enterprise scalable engine, those are the uses where, again, and that's why I really like when you say data is the differentiator, it starts right there. Like, yes, it matters because garbage in, garbage out, but also because those are the uses, the ones that are going to rely on your data, your sensitive client data, your data that you've spent, your business has spent all this time and money to build that data through your transactions, interactions, et cetera. That is the data that you want to be using, that enterprise grade AI, that, secure, connected to only, right? When we think about input and output rules, it's like telling Claude or, ChatGPT or whatever, only include the information that I put in this chat. Don't go to the internet like that without having to tell it. The rules are set by design. This is the system that is connected to our very precious, very well-governed data. That's where you really want to focus that cost on, versus we want AI that does everything and uses the internet and all of this stuff. It's kind of a waste. And by thinking about it this way, I think in two ways there. Data is the differentiator. It's both going to get you better results, and it's how you can really think through, like, is this really a sound sort of enterprise AI strategy versus I just want to go ask, what I should eat for dinner tonight. I think that's kind of I want to make my beautiful nano banana these slides for me, that sort of thing, versus really what is AI, how is this a use of AI that's really going to enrich our business and drive our strategy?
I think that competitive advantage is so incredibly important. And just like you look at your business strategy as a whole, and you both touched on it, where do you want to invest? Where do you want to let someone else invest and you can utilize their services or utilize the outcomes? But where do you need to invest to really be able to maintain that competitive advantage? As we start to wrap up, I will first ask if there are any questions from the audience. I can't see if
I know, it's
your hands.
My astigmatism is coming back. I'm going to need LASIK again.
All right. Well, as you think about one, why don't we go ahead and talk about key takeaways and whatnot. So, there are obviously priorities for organizations and priorities for scaling enterprise AI. I'd love to hear from both of you if you are, want this room to take away one key thing or two key things. What's on your mind?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Great.
Can't see you.
Saved by the bell.
Great. Hi.
I'm in human resources, and I'm just wondering, with regard to workflows, people, we're kind of looking at human and agentic resources, right? So HR is trying to identify which skill sets are most essential for creating some of this new world, right? So what would you recommend for HR professionals to be able to add value within their organizations for these critical thought decisions and roadmaps?
I love this question, and I'll make a shameless plug for a conversation tomorrow that will be happening here on the culture, and that AI is really AI and deployment of AI is really a culture question. I think as you look at what do you want, back to the investment and your competitive advantage, what do you want your organization to look like in the future? So just like if you're designing a business strategy, as I think about workforce and what do I want people to spend time on, I don't want my entire organization to be spending time building bots. That is not where I think every single person in an organization has the most value. And should be spending their time. But I do want everyone in the organization to understand how to use the tools, how to use the technology, and where to go for help within the organization or outside of the organization. So my recommendation is how I think about it, and how we think about it at Hike 2, is what are you designing your workforce to be for the future? What are the skills that you have today? Where do you want to invest in skills? And what do you think the technology should be doing for you that maybe you have people doing today? I'm assuming you have people doing today. But then what will those jobs look like in the future, right? And how do you make sure that you bring your organization along so that it isn't an idea in the organization that we're bringing in AI and therefore X% of the people aren't going to have roles anymore. But X% of the people's roles may be changing. And maybe as you grow, you might not need to hire more people to support you, but how do you ensure that the organization is supported in that change and know that those roles, the skills, and what is expected of them is going to change? And then how do you make sure, of course, we talk about this a lot, especially in the legal space, there's a learning path for new associates that go through law firms. And that's true for any large organization, right? You're bringing in, whether it's financial services, healthcare, you have to support the people that are coming in at the entry level. How do you do that, and how do you grow that staff if you're expecting that entry level work to now be done by AI or by bots or agents, whatever technology you want to use? So making sure that you have a design for that so that you can bring in that talent and they can learn and grow in the organization, I think is incredibly important throughout that strategy. And so designing for the future, making sure that you support your organization where you are, and trying to kind of calm the nervousness or bring the people along and give them the right skills.
I'll take that one level deeper. A few slides ago, and it's my bad for not really harping on it, but there was like a green box at the bottom that said kind of like, it's not about build everything, buy everything. It's really about what are our current processes, users, personas, right? And what does that work look like? I think that's like the level deeper of, like Amy said, it's what do we want the future of their work to look like? And what I think the key question is which of the things that they're doing manually right now do we want to replace with technology? That's the piece where, again, a shameless plug here, but one thing that I really love about how we think about these and why I think those 4 layers are so broadly applicable to any organization is I think that it's really taking the time to map out the current way of working. Here is the current, this person does this in this system, and then either right, manually tells someone else, or the system tells the next person, or the system does the next piece. Literally from start to finish, end to end, this person, this task, this system. Doing that, I think, is like the only way to do that, because then you start to see, okay, these are the places where we really don't need a human to do this. And you start to actually, I think it does both. I think it both elevates kind of, right, says these are the places where we should not be wasting our human resources, and starting to plug in these are really great uses of maybe just automation, maybe just XYZ, maybe this is an AI use case, but also parallelly, I think that's not a word, but also at the same time elevating the things that are left, this is actually where there's great human value. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And I love that, and kind of back to the point, I love the word elevate, and then also just talking about the human in the loop is that this elevates our work. This augments, what we do. And, from a human in the loop perspective, we think about, somebody was talking about, okay, are you additionally adding friction? But one of the ways to think about it is what is the point where there's the greatest consequence, where judgment and decision making is critical for your organization, for your business. I was reminded of some folks I may have heard Deloitte had published a report for the Australian government, and it had a bunch of hallucinations. It's like, well, the human in the loop should have edited that and understood what the outputs were. That was the highest consequence, highest risk. And I think putting ourselves, integrating our processes and organization where you're putting the AI intelligence at their best value, you're putting folks within the organization at their highest value, and I think that kind of synergy and approach helps kind of maximize these investments.
Any other questions? All right, so I'll say my biggest takeaway, and then maybe you can.
Yeah.
And it definitely flows from that question. So looking at your capabilities, understanding what those are, and what your competitive advantages will help you figure out where you want to invest in this build versus buy debate, and in the overall scaling of AI for your organization and for the enterprise.
Yeah, it was a perfect kind of segue too. That my takeaway probably is what we were just talking through, which is that for me, it's always going to be about understanding. I think it goes to change management. I think it goes to ROI. I think it goes to basically everything. To me, it always comes down to do we understand the way that our people are currently working, the things that they're doing that are, we can't live without, that are really critical to our outcomes. And again, really being able to, I didn't make that last step, so hopefully connecting it here, going back to those 4 layers of the enterprise architecture, thinking through which of those pieces, like I said earlier, if it's document management and we've got humans, saving documents to there, and then now when we're trying to use AI, it doesn't have that as a source, and we're like, why is it missing all of this important stuff? Because somebody didn't save it. Thinking through each of those pieces also, when we think through that current state way of working, which pieces of that architecture need to continue to depend on humans, and which pieces of that can we build into our workflow. So it's not quite human in the loop, which I want to leave if that's part of what you're going to talk about. But for me, it's that, we are talking about, I think at a high level, we need to understand that we are talking about replacing human efforts with technology, and we do really need to think through what does the current state for our humans look like, and is this improving that? And now your turn, and don't worry about time.
It is the same, because I kind of wove it in, but I think, obviously the human loop, I think to the rent the brain sort of concept is, understand, the specification and verification. What are you getting from the system? Is the data right? Are you getting the context right? Not only the data, but, what you're feeding into the systems. And then, do you have a strategy or an approach, for the entire organization, not sort of at the points where AI are. Mm-hmm. It's where your organization is and where AI should be.
That's great.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.